Okay, so before I talk about what I do to ease my symptoms, I just want to say, like, 2.5 years ago, before I started getting POTS symptoms, I had migraines. So the thing about me is that I need to judge if my symptoms are being caused by POTS or if they're being caused by migraines because the treatment is pretty much opposite. So if this is a solely POTS episode, what I will basically do is hydrate a ton. And I'll also add salt to my water. I know people love to use like the LMNT or like an electrolyte powder. I prefer just normal salt. And mainly for me, it's because I like to gradually increase the salt intake throughout the day. I don't love that sensation of kind of overstimulating myself in terms of just adding salt to the water because my body just actually and this is just a me thing, my body just kind of like tenses up for a few moments and then it relaxes and it comes back to balance. So I like to be really mindful of like how I'm putting my salt in my water and when. But the other thing I've done is kind of like avoid the extremes of temperature. So I typically will not take like a super hot shower. I'm also not going to go into super cold spaces. And that's because the stimulation of my nervous system becomes too great. So if I go into a very hot shower, I can basically feel like I'm going to pass out. If I go into a very cold space, it pretty much feels like everything hardens up. And then when I move into a space of warmth, I can feel the come down. Like I can feel myself almost getting like weaker and more tired. So I'm very mindful of like not doing things that would put me in those extremes as often as I typically would. The other thing I do is I love compression leggings. So, like your typical workout leggings that add a little bit of compressive support. I don't use compression socks unless it's a very like intense day. And that's personally just like a me choice because when I have used compression socks, what pretty much happens is that like in that space of trying to like balance back out, I just don't feel that great. So I'll really only use them in places where like it's necessary, not just kind of like by my choice. And then the one thing that I found that has been just like incredibly helpful, which I like, honestly, this was just a game changer for me. I never let myself get to the state of hunger. So I eat every like 2 to 3 hours. I'm basically like Brad Pitt in all the Ocean's 11 movies where he's constantly eating. And it's because I have found that when I let myself get to the state of hunger, pretty much like I don't get a hunger cue, I get a fainting cue. So in the times where I haven't eaten, what happens is I will start to feel like waves go through me. I will start to have difficulty seeing. I'm going to feel like I can't swallow. And so in order to combat that, I basically have to get ahead of the curve. So first thing in the morning, I wake up, I chug a glass of like room temperature water. Again, not going to the extremes of like too hot or too cold. And then I immediately eat. And a lot of the times, like, I'm probably not hungry, but I have to get ahead of my body's signals. And that's kind of the rule of thumb that I use for any POTS episode. It's always about being ahead. Now, for me, the tricky part is that when I get migraines, a lot of the stuff like salt or like not necessarily hot or cold, but the salt, like eating certain things, any foods that would trigger a migraine but would like help a POTS episode, they're kind of counterintuitive. So I really have to be in a space of knowing like, is this a POTS episode or is this a migraine episode? In a migraine, I'm going to have caffeine. In POTS, if I have caffeine, I basically am overstimulated. And the goal for me is really to never be in a space of overstimulation because it's really difficult for me to bring myself back down to a baseline. And the biggest thing that I've noticed with POTS is that I'm very easily overstimulated across the board. Now, whether that means like eating too hot food and my body has a reaction, going into a change of temperature, or like general overstimulation by seeing things in my environment and kind of just feeling like overwhelmed. But the biggest thing for me has been the feeling of like vibrations. So if my heat turns on or if my AC turns on, if I hear like a certain hum, like the vibration of the subway, there are certain vibrations that on some days I just cannot be around them. And it's literally because my body goes into the state of overstimulation, my nervous system gets triggered, and I have a really difficult time bringing it back down. There are other days where I'm completely fine and I can be within that vibration. So the way that I like to judge it is I meditate every single morning. Now, yes, I do meditation because I enjoy it, but one of the biggest things that I found with P.O.T.S episodes is that when I'm meditating, I'm literally checking in on how my body physically responds to stimuli. So if I'm in a state of meditation where I'm lowering my like stimulus reaction, when I'm stimulated, I'm then seeing what that reaction is going to be. So this morning when I meditated, I already felt kind of like buzzy. And then I made the mistake of having too much coffee. Now, it was just like a selfish thing on my part. I straight up was like, do not have this extra cup. And I was like, it's okay. We're going to be fine. Right after I had that extra cup, I basically started having symptoms, but not nearly to the degree that I was having them before. This was kind of like on a scale of 1 to 10, this was like a 2. But when I'm in that state of stimulation, what I basically have to do is just wait it out. So I have to drink a ton of water. I have to de-stimulate my entire nervous system to get it back to a space of stability. If you guys have any questions about this, like, let me know. I have kind of just taken like the intuitive approach to healing this. Like, yes, there are a ton of things that I've done from like a very stereotypical P.O.T.S standpoint, but there's also a ton of stuff that I've done energetically in terms of figuring out how my nervous system works in order to get it to function at a more healthy level as I navigate my day.